Today, I'm going to show how you can install Python VS Code and Git and then run your first Python script if you're an absolute beginner to Python. I'm going to be showing a little bit of the basics as well, and then describe a little bit about functions, and then go over how you might use AI or ChatGPT to help in your Python learning journey. Now, if you're an absolute beginner in coding, I will be going over a lot of things in this video that you might not be able to grasp in this video alone without seeing the implementations of them. But I just want to give you awareness for these tools and these basics that are in Python, so that in future tutorials, when I use some of these things, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to understand what I am doing. There are no prerequisites for this other than you need a computer, and to do that, we're going to download Python. So we're going to now just jump into it, and I'm going to show Python 3.11. That's the one that I use right now. And you have got the Python page right here. It'll be down in the description so you can follow along. We're going to look for 3.11. So I have 3.11.9 here. I'm going to click into it, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and installer. I'm going to click on the Windows installer 64-bit. So go ahead and place this in a folder that you have access to. And here it is. Let's go ahead and click it. And then we just run through all of this. So I'm going to click upgrade now. For you guys, you would have just download. I forget exactly what it is, but you would click the button that says install Python. And then there should also be a checkbox that says add to path. You want to add Python to your path. And it should be down below, like in the bottom area of the user interface. So make sure you check that option. All right, we got Python installed. The next thing we need is Visual Studio Code. This is basically another program that'll just make running the code a little bit easier. It's what you call an IDE. And we're gonna now download it into, well, find it in a location that you can easily find. Go ahead, download it, and then you would run the setup for the installer. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's do next. And for these options, you do want to make sure that all of these are checked. Add a path, register, add open to code, add open with code, and then you can create a desktop icon if you want. And then next, install, and then it's going to go ahead and install VS Code onto your computer. So we launched VS Code, and for Python, there are a couple of extensions that you want to install. So we go to this little blocks area, and you'd want to go into Python, and then you'd want to install this. I already have it installed, so no need for that. You also want to make sure Python debugger is installed, and then you would want Pylance as well. So make sure this is installed, and once you have those three things installed, we've basically set up all of our environment stuff that we need to get going. There's also one more tool I highly recommend you download, which is Git. This allows you to download GitHub repositories basically and use them. And this is pretty important if you want to do a lot of open source software and just play around with those things. So for Windows, you click Windows and then click here to download. We run through the exact same installation for this. And I'm not going to run through this one, but you go into the installer and you can just install, you can just go through all the default options and get that installed. So I'm going to exit the setup there, and we are all good to go now. So saying that we did everything correctly, we're going to test a couple of things. So we're going to open up a new terminal here in VS Code. And all we want to do is type Python. And if you see that Python is booting up, then you will know that Python has been installed and is in your path, and you are good to go. Mine says 3.9 here because I also have Python 3.9 on my computer. And to exit out of this, you would type in quit, 2 parentheses, and then you'll exit out of that. And then I'm just going to type CLS, enter to clear out my terminal. And I'm going to show you now how you can run a quick hello world script in Python. So inside of VS Code, we want to open up a folder. This just makes things a little bit easier. So you can either do open up folder here on the top left corner, or what I like to do is create a folder in my file explorer. I'm going to call this test world. And then what I like to do is double click into it, and then you can right click and then open with code. And this is going to open that folder inside of VS Code. And this just makes it a lot easier to re-access any projects you're working on later on in the future. So here we are. Now what I want to do is click on new file. It's this little paper icon here. And we're going to call it hello world.py, and you want to add that .py extension to any Python script that you're running so that the interpreter knows that it's Python. To print out a line inside of Python, all you would do is just type print, parentheses, you'd add quotations, double quotations or single quotations, it doesn't matter. You would do quotations, and then we just type in hello world, and then go ahead and save that by Control S, or you can go to save. I recommend you do Control S. And then what we can do now that we have the terminal open, you want to make sure that it's in the same folder that the script is located in. We can type in Python and then hello world.py, and you can do auto completion by just clicking tab. And so what's going to happen if we run this, we're going to get a hello world in the terminal, and boom, that's running your first Python script. So you can either run it in the terminal this way, or if you want to do something that I highly recommend you learn how to do effectively, debug the code. What we can do is add a second line. So all I'm going to do is copy this. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to put a 2 just to differentiate it. We're going to debug and step through the code, and this makes things a little bit easier to debug if you want to figure out which area in the code is causing an issue. So in VS Code, you can set breakpoints on this left-hand side here, and this will stop the code wherever you set the breakpoint when you are trying to run it in debug mode. And to start debugging, you would go up into Run in VS Code and start debugging. And then you would click on Python debugger, then Python file, and it's going to now run the code. And what's going to happen is this line is going to highlight yellow. And if you take a look in this terminal down below, you have a line that says hello world. So it printed the first one. And then to move on, all we have to do is click F10 on the keyboard, and the second line is now going to print. So this makes it very effective if we want to just find out where things are located in the code, and you'll find it more useful the more that you use Python. But that is a little bit of a higher level skill to learn, but I think it's good to get exposed to breakpoints early on in your coding journey. All right, so now that we've gone and printed out our first hello world, I want to go over a couple of things in Python, like how do you store things in code? How do you specify and instantiate variables? In all coding languages, you can specify numbers, text, or aka strings, things like lists, arrays, all of these different things you can specify inside of Python to achieve different end goals. And I'm going to go over 2 of them, which are integers and strings. So inside of Python, you can specify anything to equal a certain value. So in this case, I just slammed my fingers on the keyboard, and so I have this variable name here. I can set that equal to 5, and then I can use that same print function that we used earlier and then print out this value. So I'm going to go ahead and run the code, and you can see that we've got 5 here. So let me rename this to, let's say, number equals 5, and then I'm going to say text equals some text. And when you specify text inside of Python, you always need to have it inside of some type of quotes. It doesn't matter if it's double quotes or single quotes, you just need to have it inside of quotes. We can also do single quotes right here and delete these double quotes, and it'll work the same. So now if I instead do print number and then print text, it's going to print out these 2 values right here that I stored inside of these variables. So 5 and then some text. So this is important to understand because inside of Python, you can assign these variables any value for the most part, and then pass those values into things like functions, which is needed when you're trying to achieve a specific goal or outcome. There's also one more thing. So the way that Python reads the code is it's sequential. So it goes line by line. And so one thing I want to show real quick is what happens if we use the same variable name below some part in the code. It's going to change it to that value. And so to illustrate that real quick, I'm going to leave this here. And I'm going to print out number twice. So here I have number equals 5, and then here I have numbers equal 10. And so I'm going to run this, And so when it reaches this part in the code, the number is equal to 5 first. Then it goes to the next line, it gets reassigned number equals 10, and then when it prints it out the second time, it is now equal to 10. So this is important to understand for the flow of code in Python, because you might reassign a variable a different value so that you can achieve something else with it. And a few more things I'm going to go over real briefly. Those are if-else statements and then for loops, while loops. So inside of Python, if you want to, let's say, have a conditional like if something is true, then do this, well, we can use what are called if-else loops. And so let's say I have a number and I'm going to set it to user input. So this input function is something you can use inside of Python to take in a value from the programmer or the user. I'm going to say user value, and then I'm going to start my if statement. So if number is equal to, for conditionals, you have to use two equal signs inside of Python, and most coding languages actually. If number is equivalent to 1, then print the number is 1. And then we're going to have something that captures all of the other cases. We'll say else print the number is not 1. And then actually let's include elif here too. So we can say elif number equals 2. We can say print the number is 2. And then now this last statement, we can say the number is not 1 or 2. So if we run this here, we can specify 1. It's going to say, oops, I'm sorry, let me backtrack real quick. So what I'm getting right here is it says the number is not 1 or 2. And that's because what I have here are integer values. And what's happening in this input is I'm getting back a string. So this brings up one more thing. What happens if you want to accept an integer value or you want to change something into an integer value? Well, saying that you can, I'm going to say, I'm going to specify int, and I'm going to change it into an integer so that we can actually get this working as we need to. So user value equals 1. The number is 1. I'm going to put 2. The number is 2. And then I'm going to say 3, and it says the number is not 1 or 2. So if-else statements are really great if you want to have something conditional happen inside of your code based off of the situation that you might encounter. So those are if-else loops. They're very useful. I find that I use them all the time in my code. And then the other things are for loops and then while loops. So a for loop is basically a statement that will continue running for a certain amount of times based on some type of criteria. Let's say that I have a number and I want to do a certain task for a certain amount of times. Well, I can say for number in range. And so this range is going to allow me to specify how many times I want to do this loop. So I'm going to say we'll go 0 to 6. So this is going to be 6 times, including 0. We are going to print out the number. And so what we'll get inside of the terminal is 0 to 5. And this for loop has executed 6 times. So for loops are very useful in case you want to complete something a certain amount of times. And then the last one I want to do is while loop. So while true, and while true is one that I use quite a bit. So basically what a while loop will do is it'll continue running for eternity unless you stop it. So if I say print 5 and then I run this, I'm just going to keep getting 5 inside of the terminal here. And that's because there's nothing telling this while loop to stop. So the way you can read a while loop is while whatever this criteria is true, continue doing what's inside of this loop. So that's important if you have like some type of input and say something, and you say you just want to continue taking in some type of user input. You can use a while true loop. And then there are other things that you can utilize to break out of the while true loop in order to continue executing the code. But I'm not going to go over in too much detail all of the implementations for these loops. It's just something that you should be aware about for Python. All right, so now I want to give a high-level overview about functions and why you might want to use functions inside of your code. So I have this modified here, I have hello world 6 different times. What I could do is just run this and it'll output hello world 6 different times into my terminal. And if I wanted to, let's say, add this 6 more times, well, now I can, modify this hand 1 by 1, 9, 10, 11, 12, and run this again, and we'll get this 12 times. But that is kind of inefficient and doesn't look too nice. And so what instead we want to do is separate it out into functions and do our functionality in a different way. And so what I have here is I have a for loop. So what the for loop is going to do is it's going to execute this block of code a certain amount of times because I have this criteria here, and all this range from 1 to 7 is doing is saying to run this 6 different times. And so let's just run this code to see what it does. So let me clear out my terminal here. And as you can see, this executes it 6 different times with hello world and increases the suffix for the value that we want. And then let's say we want to do this, let's say 30 times. We just change this single parameter right here, and we'll get that 30 minus 1 times inside of our terminal. And this is just much more efficient in case we want to use this other functionality in any other place. So this is a pretty generic example, but you can use functions for many other things inside of the code. In the case of like chatbots, maybe having the audio generated in a certain function, or having the large language model generation happen in another function, and all you have to do is call them from the main script. And so there are a bunch of different applications that you'll use with functions. And so I'll go over real quick on how you can create a function. So let me go ahead and comment this out. But for Python, functions you always want to instantiate before you call them. And so actually, for example, if I now move this for loop before the function call and try to run this, I'm going to run into an error because print line has not been defined. And so because this function was defined after I wanted to use it, the Python interpreter isn't able to find what function actually needs to be called. So you need to put the function before where you call it, which is inside of this for loop. So let's comment this out, and let's have a different example where we're going to add 2 different things. So to define a function, we do def, and we're just going to call add the function add underscore numbers, and then all functions need to end into parentheses with a colon. And so inside of this function, we want to accept 2 parameters, and we'll call those number 1 and then number 2. We now just need to add the functionality into here. And so we're going to say total is equal to number 1 plus number 2. And then functions can return values. And in this case, let's say we want to return the total. Cool. We're going to now return the total value. And if we want to use this function, well, let's go ahead and define these 2 numbers. And we don't have to use the same names for the numbers that we're going to pass in here. We can use any arbitrary name. So I'm going to say, let's just call it value 1 is equal to 5. And then say value 2 is equal to 10. And inside of Python, if you're coming from any other language, you don't have to specify what type these values are. So you don't have to do int, you don't have to do string, you just let it figure out what you're trying to do. So in this case, we have integer values 5 and 10. And then we want to now use this function. And to use any function, all you have to do is use the name of the function. So add underscore numbers, and then we'll have to pass in the 2 values here. So we need to say number 1 is equals to value 1. That's the first one we want to add. Number 2 is equal to value 2. Technically, you don't need to specify these names in here, and it'll work just fine. But I like to do this just for clarity. And then we're going to run it. Now, we're not going to get anything outputted to the terminal here, and that's because we don't have the total value printed out anywhere. So what's happening here is I'm going to step through the code to show you step by step on what's happening. So let's go ahead and run the code, and it's going to stop at the first function. It's going to instantiate this function so that we can use it. Then you're going to store the first value, and then you're going to store the second value, and you can actually track along what's happening here, which is value 1, value 2, to see what the Python code is storing these values as. To step into the function that we made, we just click F11, and we are now inside of the function. And you can see that the two parameters, number 1 and number 2, are their respective values, 5 and 10. And then if we step one more, you can now see total is equal to 15. But what happens when we step through one more time is it returns the value and has nothing to print it out. So what we need to do is just say an arbitrary variable total is equal to the response of this function. In this case, the response is total. And then we just need to print out total. And so I'm going to actually use a different name just to illustrate that we don't need to use the same variable name that we have returned here. Total from function, and then total from function. And then I'm going to take out these breakpoints, run through, and it's going to print out 15. So that is a high-level overview on how functions work. They can get much more complicated than that, but they are very important to understand why and how they work and when you might want to use them. I generally use functions whenever I need to complete a task twice, so that I can abstract that to a function name, which makes my code a little bit easier to read instead of having to do that thing twice in code. And so I highly recommend you just go and try to use functions inside of your code just to get a feel for how they work. And then if you do run into any issues, ChatGPT is a great tool to ask how to make functions and why to use functions. But this hopefully gives you a overview and a high level on how functions work for Python code, as well as how to run Python code. And I do just want to quickly show how you can use ChatGPT to get started with some things in Python. The biggest thing is just figuring out how to prompt it. So the better you get at reading Python code, the better you can actually prompt ChatGPT. But going off of this example here, I'm just going to use this for the illustration of ChatGPT and how you might be able to use it. We're going to head into ChatGPT and just ask it to break it down for us. So we're going to ask, I have some Python code and I'd like you to break it down for me. So we could just prompt it with that and then send it. And then the great thing about ChatGPT is it's really good for code, and it'll help break these things down. So it's going to describe the function for you here. It's going to assign these variables, and then it's going to tell you that there is a function call and then a print line. So all of the things that we just went over, it will describe it, and you can always ask in more detail if any of this confuses you, which is a great way to go about learning because it's almost like having a personal teacher by your side to ask questions. Now, there are cases where it hallucinates and gives you answers that might not be correct. However, 9 times out of 10, it is correct. And when you're learning, you can't grade something that you don't know. So you won't know whether it's giving you BS or not. But the more that you practice, the more that you learn, and the more that you build things in Python, the easier it's going to be. And then just one more thing that I want to show with ChatGPT is, let's say we want to add some more complicated functionality to this. We can modify this code easily. So I'm going to say, can you modify this code so that the user can specify 2 values inside of a graphical user interface? And then I'm going to actually say, can you use tkinter? And so the more that you learn libraries, the more that you practice in Python, you can start specifying libraries to ChatGPT, and it can help guide the responses back so that it's a little bit better. And so here it's going to give us all of the code that we need. It's going to explain it all. And let's go ahead and copy this code, head over into VS Code, and run this. So once again, let's do Control-5, Python file. And then here, now we have a little tiny graphical user interface up here. And so I can add the first number, let's say 5, add the second number, and then click add. And then it's going to give us a result. The total is 15. And so ChatGPT is great at that and breaking things down or adding functionality. And there's almost an endless amount of things that you can do with ChatGPT in terms of adding functionality. So I'm not going to go over all of that. I just kind of want to show that you can do this so that if you guys are interested, you can also start building things with ChatGPT with a baseline level of Python knowledge and just being able to run a Python script on your computer. So that's going to be pretty much it for today's video. Just a basic introduction into Python. And future tutorials are going to be utilizing some of this knowledge in order to accomplish some of these tasks. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Once again, I'd like to thank all the members of my channel for supporting me. I know it's been a while, so sorry about that, guys. I got a little bit busy, but I want to start creating some tutorial videos, some basic Python tutorials to get people up to speed if you're a beginner or anything like that, so that you can follow along in all these cool AI stuff. But yeah, see you guys later. That's going to be it.